Hey everyone, time to learn how to make some homemade pie crust. Now, could you buy the boxed Pillsbury or other generic brand of pre-made pie crust that comes in the roll? Sure, I do that sometimes. It's very simple and easy, very affordable to make a homemade pie. But I also love the taste of a homemade pie crust. My mom taught me how to make it. A lot of my aunts, my grandparents used to make homemade pie crust all the time. Delicious. And I just don't think that the store-bought version tastes quite as good as the homemade version. So I'm gonna show you how to do that. It's pretty simple. And what we're gonna be making today is a pie crust that will make for a top and a bottom crust for a pie. Now, if you wanted to make a single crust pie, like a Dutch apple pie that has a topping on the top, this crust would actually make you 2 pies. So just to keep that in mind, it's gonna give you 2 layers of pie crust, which I'm gonna show you in a later video how to turn this crust into a homemade apple pie. So this recipe starts with 3 cups of all-purpose flour in a bowl, and we're gonna add to that a little pinch of salt, about 1/4 teaspoon of salt or so. And then we're gonna add to that 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar. And I'm just gonna take my fork and give that a quick stir just to incorporate all of that sugar and salt into my flour mixture. And then we are going to be adding to this our very, very cold butter. So I have cut up here 2 sticks or 1 cup of cold butter straight from the refrigerator. You want it to be as cold as possible. So you want to use it immediately after taking it out of the refrigerator. Cold butter and cold basically everything is the key to making your pie crust really flaky and crispy and easy to work with when you go to roll it out. So I took my sticks of butter and I cut them into little cubes, and we're gonna pop those into our flour mixture here. Some people will use Crisco, which is shortening. And you can go ahead and do that too if you want to. I prefer the taste of butter. We're gonna use our pastry blender. Let me back up here and I'll show you what that looks like. So this is basically that classic item that you're gonna use to cut in fat into dry ingredients. If you remember from previous videos, we made blueberry streusel muffins and I use this pastry blender to make my streusel. So you're basically gonna use this to cut that butter into little tiny pea-sized pieces. Now this requires some muscle, build those biceps as you're baking, but your goal is to get those little pieces of butter into teeny tiny pea-sized pieces. And it's gonna probably take you about 5 minutes to make that happen with all the butter and flour that we have here. Now you're gonna have some butter sticking to your pastry blender here. All you have to do is take your fork or a butter knife and go ahead and push that off. And as your butter gets into smaller pieces, it'll stick to your pastry blender less. So this is gonna take me a few minutes. I will show you what this looks like in a couple minutes. So this is what your dough in the making should look like. If you can see in comparison to my fork, we do have some butter chunks. They're about the size of peas or so. That is what you want to see. You do want some of these butter pieces to still be intact because they're going to essentially melt whenever it bakes in the oven and will make your dough really nice and flaky and delicious to bite into. All right, so at this point, our butter is all cut into our dry ingredients, and I zoomed in a little bit so you can see what's going on here a little bit better. We are going to be adding to this bowl here 1 egg. I already cracked it into a separate bowl, and then we're gonna be adding white vinegar. White vinegar also adds to the flakiness of your pie crust. You could use apple cider vinegar if you absolutely needed to. But I'm gonna use 1 tablespoon of white vinegar, and you wanna go ahead and beat your egg up into that separate bowl before it goes into your bowl, because you don't want like egg yolk in some places and egg white in other places. You want that to be nice and evenly distributed. So we're gonna go ahead and add our 1 egg and 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. An egg acts as a binder. It's basically gonna hold a lot of your pie crust together. And if you've noticed, we've switched from our pastry blender to our fork. Our fork is going to be our mixing ingredient for the remainder of our pie dough, in addition to our hands right at the very end. Now we have our ice water. So ice water is essential, just like with our cold butter. You want things to be nice and cold. You want to touch your pie crust as little as possible with your hands. You want things to be nice and cold because the oven is what is going to kind of release and kind of melt that butter and make your pie crust really nice and flaky. So I like to take some ice cubes and put them into a liquid measuring cup. And we're gonna start out with 4 tablespoons, or what would be 1/4 of a cup. I like to use the tablespoons because it's just a little bit easier to get it out of the liquid measuring cup. I'm gonna add 2, and then I'm gonna kind of give my dough a little bit of a stir, kind of get some of that liquid down into the bottom with some of our dry ingredients down at the bottom. Then I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna take 2 more. So I'm gonna initially add, you're definitely gonna need at least 4 tablespoons of ice water. Now you may need up to 6 tablespoons. If it's really dry out, you may need more. So I'm gonna set that off to the side, and you're gonna take your fork and you're just gonna kind of work in those liquid ingredients into your pie dough with your fork, okay? Kind of give that a toss there. You don't want too much liquid, so you would not want to take and add 6 tablespoons of water immediately, because what happens is if your dough takes on too much water, it's going to be really sticky to roll out, and it's going to stick to your counter. And pie dough is something that you kind of have one chance to roll it out for it to be its best dough that it could be. And if you add too much liquid, you're going to have to add a lot of flour to your counter, and your dough gets kind of really tough, and it's really not the best situation there. So what I do at this point is I like to take my hand and give it a little mush. And if it sticks together, if you notice it didn't stick together super well there, that's how you know whether you've added enough water or not. So I think that I need another additional tablespoon of water here. So just to kind of give you an update, I have a total of 5 tablespoons of water in my dough now. So if it's really humid out, you might only need 4. If it's really dry, you might need more. So you just want to kind of get that nice and incorporated and stirred in there. All right, so we're gonna pause now and do our, we'll call it squish test. We'll do a nice little squish here and see if that dough now comes together. You want to use your hands as least as possible, because the more you use your hand, the more that butter is going to melt. So if you notice, I still have a lot of dryness in my dough. I think I actually need 1 more tablespoon. So sometimes if it's dry out, you might need more. So I would not add more than 6 tablespoons because that's definitely more than you would need. So you see here, try to get all of that nice and distributed. I'm gonna move these 2 things out of the way, and I think that should be good. So at this point, you're gonna take your hands, you're gonna mush that dough together, bring that dough together, kind of, you might have, almost like kneading it in the bowl, okay? And at one point, once you get most of this dough all together, it is gonna stick to your fingers. I would recommend definitely not wearing any rings or anything as you're doing this, because it'll get caught in your hand jewelry. No watches. So as you notice here, my dough is coming together. And at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and turn that onto my counter space and kind of get all of those pieces nice and together. Now, if you only needed a bottom crust, you could half this recipe, do the 1.5 cups of flour. And if you needed to cut that egg in half, you could do 2 tablespoons of egg. Make sure you get all those pieces there. Now at this point, you don't need flour on your counter quite yet, but you do need to get your dough into a ball and try to scrape up any pieces that are sticking to the counter before you start rolling it out. So there's my dough, and I'm gonna be using this in 2 separate pieces, one for the bottom and one for the top. So immediately I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna pull it into 2 separate dough balls, okay? Again, get up as much as you can. I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna wrap it in plastic wrap. I'm gonna let it rest for about 30 minutes. You can actually pop this into the refrigerator and deal with it. You know, say you wanted to make your pie tomorrow, you could do that. I'm gonna actually roll this out immediately in about 30 minutes once I get my filling done, which is gonna be my apple pie filling. But this can sit in your refrigerator for about 2 days, but you wanna get it into a nice disc, wrap it up in plastic wrap, pop it into the fridge, or if you're gonna use it immediately, you can do that then. So here are the beginnings of our scratch pie dough. I'm gonna show you in an upcoming video how to roll this out and turn this into a beautiful apple pie. See you later.